All right, my fellow PR people, we need to talk, and not on background or off the record. We'll explain in this episode of For Immediate Release. Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 234 of For Immediate Release. I'm Neville Hobson.
And I am Shel Holtz. And today we're going to talk about media relations, and in particular, something that a lot of organizations and their PR people are doing that is really infuriating to journalists, also to those of us in public relations who know better. I have a degree in journalism, and I worked in journalism for a little while before I came over to the corporate side. So I have dealt with this from both sides of media relations, and I have always been surprised at how difficult it is for a lot of PR people to figure out what it means and when you can go on background. There was an article in PR News talking about the fact that a lot of journalistic outlets are reinvigorating and reintroducing their on-background policies. They talk about Wired magazine saying anyone talking to Wired reporters in any official capacity does so on the record by default. The Verge says you cannot email reporters statements prefaced with on background and assume we will treat the material as if it is on background. And Quartz wrote, on background, no attribution isn't real no matter how many times PR pros say it is. Now, the PR News article makes the point that all of these clarifications are coming out now because of the declining trust in media. There's so much saying, oh, this was on background, and people don't know if there was really a viable, credible source behind it. The spread of misinformation is up. They point to the recent Gallup poll that found only 7% of U.S. adults have a great deal, and 29% have a fair amount of trust in newspaper, TV, and radio news reporting. They talked about the 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer found that 67% of its respondents believe journalists are lying, and nearly 1 in every 2 respondents see media as a divisive force in society. I went and looked at what the Verge had written, and they're very explicit. They said being on background means that they tell things to reporters, but those reporters agree to not specifically attribute that information to a person by name. Oftentimes, companies will make things significantly worse and also insist that background information be paraphrased, further obscuring both specific details and the source of those details. From now on, the default for communications professionals and people speaking to The Verge in an official capacity will be on the record. They point out that they'll continue to honor some requests to be on background, but at their discretion and only for specific reasons that they can articulate to their readers. But they list some examples of on background requests they've gotten, and there are a lot of them. We'll have a link to this in the show notes. I just want to share a couple of these. More than one big company insists on holding product briefings on background with no attributions, which means no one can properly report what company executives say about their own new products during marketing events. A big tech company PR person emailed us a link to the company's own website on background. A food delivery company insisted on discussing the popularity of chicken wings on background. And a big tech company sent us a statement on the record with the caveat that it could not be attributed to a specific individual. It is ridiculous. And as a public relations professional, I would never consider this. And I find it, well, maybe less remarkable than I initially felt that it was, that there are so many PR people who do this, because as we have talked about so often in the past, Neville, there is no credentialing required to work in PR, anybody can hang up a shingle and say they're in PR and say, oh, I'm going to put this on background because I saw that on an episode of The West Wing or something, and think that the journalistic outlet that they're talking to is going to abide by it.
Yeah, I have to admit, I had a kind of a deep sigh when I knew we were going to be talking about this topic today, because we've talked about this so many times in the past, normally focused on embargoes, but this is all part of that same picture. And I think you kind of pinpointed the issue, really, that I get the impression oftentimes that when I get unsolicited pitches, which are frequent, or worse, the ones that assume a relationship because they tell me that what I've received from someone I never know who they are, is embargoed, which I didn't agree to. They assume that's okay. It is a lack of care, an utter lack of consideration for the receiver. This is just a blitzkrieg, a blitz out to a mailing list. I mean, I notice when I unsubscribe to these, which I do now, I used to just ignore them, and that, of course, doesn't make it go away at all. That, unfortunately, our friends at Cision, their database tends to be the source for most of the stuff that I get. And I know this is not Cision. They make it very clear to their subscribers that you must not use their data for stuff like this. And it happens all the time. And we've talked about this, as I mentioned, a lot in the last decade. And here we are again talking about this topic. I think the article that you originally referenced for this, PR News Online, their summary of all of this, it says none of this is brand new. The guidelines have been around for a long time. This whole thing of on background, by the way, I looked up a definition of it, and amongst all the online dictionaries, the usual suspects, they all have a definition. A couple of them talk about this being a particularly American term in American journalism, because I've not really heard it talked about much over here. Embargoes and that related thing, totally, of course, that's part of it. But the Macmillan Dictionary is, as an example, they define it. If someone speaks to a reporter on background, they provide information that can be published, but do not allow their name to be used. That isn't that kind of the same as off the record? But I guess not, because there are definitions for that as well. So maybe people are getting hung up on this. I don't think that's the case at all, Shel. I think I remember a conversation we had, I can't remember when, but I remember part of it was talking about one of the issues with this is the laziness in some PR firms where they kind of hand it to the intern to do. So there's no care. There's no tactical approach, really, never mind strategic, that says, hey, let's get this list of 10,000 folks and whap out this announcement and say this is embargoed. The notion of pitching and what you've cited from the Verges is really great. Crystal clear, no punches pulled in how they're defining this. It's about relationships, right? I mean, we've talked about this so many times too, that if you have a relationship, you can seek agreement to certain things. And that surely is a behavioral element that must be enshrined in the various codes of conduct that the professional bodies cite. I know that the CIPR here in the UK references this, the way in which you behave when you practice your profession. This would fall into that area because the unsolicited approaches and the lack of care in those approaches definitely are not part of those codes of conduct.
No, absolutely not. And there is a big difference between on background and off the record. On background, You hear this in the news all the time. They'll say a State Department representative speaking on background told us. So you know where they're from. You just don't get their name. Off the record means I'm telling you this because you're working on this article and I think it's useful information, but you can't report it. At least you can't report it coming from me at all. You never hear anybody say, so-and-so told us off the record, because they can't. It's off the record. But on background, off the record, and embargo, all three of them only happen when there is an agreement between the journalist and the spokesperson or the PR person representing the organization. So I agree with you, man. I get these press releases that say this is embargoed until. No, it's not. And I am sorely tempted on a number of occasions to just publish them. Usually I write back and I say, I noticed that you put this is embargoed, and I just wanted to explain to you that it's not, because we didn't agree to this in advance. You can't put embargoed on a press release and make it so. That is inappropriate, unprofessional, and really stupid. So I think we need, as PR people, to start behaving professionally if we want to establish those good relationships with the reporters that you're talking about, Neville. I mean, The Verge, in their article, said that there's a big trend with tech companies right now to treat background as a default or even a condition of reporting, which is absurd. That means, they say, that reporters are now routinely asked to report things without being able to attribute them appropriately, and readers aren't being presented with clear sources of information. Where do we think this distrust of the media is coming from? It is incumbent upon us, as public relations people, to behave professionally and understand the way these things work. I mean, embargoes have a place. If we're making an announcement on Monday and I'm going to talk to you, the reporter, about it on Thursday, it's so that you can do your research, and when we make the announcement, you'll have a thorough and comprehensive piece, and you as the reporter will probably appreciate that. But that's why you do that, not just because it's convenient for you to blast this out today, even though you're not making the announcement until tomorrow. Let's please act like professionals.
I did like The Verge's plain speaking, and when they're talking about all these topics. So they define off the record very simply. Off the record is simple. You talk to us. We agree not to use anything we hear in any of our reporting unless we can source it otherwise. Like background, off the record is an agreement. If we don't agree, you are not off the record. That last sentence, or the last two sentences, summarize this whole thing. It's about an agreement. It's about trust, and therein is part of it. I don't believe PR associations and professional bodies need to set out another set of rules. We know what we need to do as communicators here. We know exactly how this should work. And so why aren't we doing it? We could spend longer than we have to dive into Edelman's trust barometer, look at all the research on why there is declining trust in the media. So this must be part of that. But to be fair, it's not just the media, by the way. It's not just the behaviors of PR professionals in established agencies doing this. I get this also directly from organizations as well who do their own distributions. So it's across the board, in which case it's the communicators we have a problem. But you mentioned, I think at the beginning, Shel, there's no kind of licensing, there's no penalties. This is just a behavioral thing. So it's a decline in professional behavior. That's a bigger issue, I suspect. But this is the landscape we deal with. So we have to deal with it.
Yes, we do. And I think by getting the word out and insisting that our brethren in the industry act professionally, we might be able to chip away at it. And by the way, the other thing that made me crazy when I was a reporter was somebody telling me something and then saying, oh, by the way, this was off the record.
Yeah. I hear that too.
No, it's not.
So this is the first time in some years we've talked about this. I wonder how long it'll be before we're talking about it again. Soon, I suspect.
Yeah, I suspect. But until then, that'll be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.